In the year 629, a 27-year-old Buddhist monk walked out of the Tang Dynasty capital and into the desert. He had no permission, no escort, no magical companions, just a horse, a water skin, and a conviction that the Buddhist scriptures in China were incomplete, that somewhere in India the originals still existed, and that someone had to go get them. He nearly died of thirst in the Gobi. He was captured by bandits who tried to sacrifice him to a river god. He climbed the Himalayas alone, and 17 years later, he walked home with 657 sacred texts on the backs of 20 horses. The emperor came out to meet him. The story of his journey became Journey to the West. The monkey was fiction. The monk was real. Let me tell you this story. Xuanzang was ordained as a monk at 13. He was born Chen Yi in 602 AD in today's Henan province. His father was a Confucian scholar. His older brother was already a Buddhist monk at Jingtu Si, Pure Land Temple in Luoyang. When Chen Yi was 13, he followed his brother into the monastery and took the name Xuanzang. By his early 20s, he was one of the most accomplished Buddhist scholars in China. He'd studied under every major master. He'd memorized vast sections of scriptures. And he found a problem. The Buddhist texts that had been translated into Chinese over the previous 5 centuries were an absolute mess. Different translators had rendered the same Sanskrit terms in different ways. Key passages contradicted each other. Entire sections were missing. Schools of Chinese Buddhism were arguing over doctrines that, Xuanzang suspected, were simply mistranslated. The solution was obvious and impossible. Go to India. Find the original texts, bring them back, translate them properly. In 629, Xuanzang petitioned Emperor Taizong of the Tang Dynasty for permission to leave China. The emperor said, no. The borders were closed. The Tang was fighting the Gokturks to the northwest, and the last thing the court wanted was citizens wandering into hostile territory. Xuanzang left anyway. He slipped out of the capital city, Chang'an, today's Xi'an, at night. He was now a fugitive, an illegal immigrant. If he was caught at any border checkpoint, he'd be arrested and sent back. He traveled northwest, through Gansu province, moving by night, hiding by day. At Guazhou, near the edge of Chinese territory, a sympathetic official warned him. The next stretch was the Gobi Desert, 80 miles of sand, rock, and nothing. No water, no shade, no settlements. The border guards had orders to shoot anyone attempting to cross. Xuanzang crossed. The accounts, his own, recorded later by his disciple Pigsy in the text Da Tang Xi Yu Ji. Great Tang records on the western regions describe what happened next. He'd lost the trail almost immediately. The desert landmarks, piles of bones, animal carcasses, dried dung, disappeared in a sandstorm. His water bag ripped open. He went 4 days without water. 4 days in the Gobi, in summer. On the 4th day, the hallucinations came. Soldiers in the distance, hundreds of them, mounted, carrying banners. They advanced and retreated, flickered and dissolved. Mirages. The desert was showing him an army that didn't exist. He turned back. He rode for 10 miles toward China. Then he stopped. He made a vow. He would reach India or die in the attempt. Turning back was worse than dying. He turned west again. On the 5th day, his horse, a gaunt old animal that had survived the desert before, suddenly veered from the path. It galloped north. Xuanzang was too weak to control it. The horse ran for half a mile and stopped at the edge of a small spring, hidden in a depression in the sand. He drank. The horse drank. They lived. Xuanzang attributed the spring to divine intervention, a bodhisattva guiding the horse. The text doesn't ask you to believe that. It just records what happened. A dying monk on a dying horse found water in a place where there was no water. The Gobi was only the beginning. Once past the desert, Xuanzang entered the kingdom of Gaochang, a small oasis state in today's Xinjiang. Along the northern edge of the Taklamakan Desert, the king of Gaochang was a devout Buddhist. When he learned that a Chinese monk was passing through, he invited Xuanzang to his court. Then he refused to let him leave. The king wanted Xuanzang to stay, to teach, to be the royal chaplain. He offered him everything: gold, a permanent monastery, a title. Xuanzang refused. The king insisted. Guards were posted. Xuanzang was effectively a prisoner. So, Xuanzang went on a hunger strike. 3 days without food, sitting in meditation, silent. On the 4th day, the king relented. He released the monk. He gave him letters of introduction to every ruler along the Silk Road, provided him with horses, gold, and an escort of soldiers. Xuanzang traveled west along the northern Silk Road, through the Tian Shan Mountains, across the steppes of Central Asia, through what is now Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan. He visited Buddhist monasteries that no longer exist. He recorded cities, customs, languages, and beliefs of peoples who have since vanished from history. In one kingdom, near today's Peshawar, Pakistan, bandits captured his entire party. The bandits worshipped a river goddess and believed that sacrificing a handsome, healthy man to the river would guarantee good harvests. They chose Xuanzang. They built an altar. They drew their knives. Now, Xuanzang asked for a moment. He sat down, closed his eyes, and began to meditate. He later said that in that moment he had felt no fear. He had accepted death and was simply preparing his mind for the next life. A storm rose. The river churned. Waves slammed the banks. Trees bent and snapped. The bandits panicked. They fell to their knees and begged for forgiveness. Xuanzang opened his eyes. The bandits released him, and several of them converted to Buddhism on the spot. He continued south, over the Hindu Kush Mountains, through the Khyber Pass, into the Indian subcontinent. He was alone again now. The escort from Gaochang had turned back long ago. He reached India in approximately 631, 2 years after leaving Chang'an. Xuanzang spent 13 years in India. He studied at Nalan Tuosi, Nalanda, the greatest Buddhist university in the world, 500 years old, 10,000 students, a library that took 6 months to burn when invaders eventually destroyed it. Xuanzang studied Sanskrit, logic, philosophy, and every school of Buddhist thought under the master Jiexian, who was over 100 years old. He became the most celebrated foreign scholar in Indian history. Kings invited him to their courts. Debate opponents conceded before his arguments. At one point, the Emperor of India, Wang Harsha, organized a public debate in Xuanzang's honor. 5,000 scholars attended, 18 days of philosophical argument. No one defeated him. And then he went home. The journey back was just as dangerous, a different route through the Pamirs, the roof of the world, where the altitude makes breathing a conscious act. He crossed mountain passes above 15,000 feet. He lost an elephant and several pack horses in a blizzard. Texts fell into rivers. He recovered what he could. In January of 645, 17 years after he'd left, Xuanzang arrived at the gates of Chang'an. He was 43 years old. He carried 657 Buddhist texts, 150 relics, statues, seeds, letters from Indian kings, and he still was technically a fugitive. Emperor Taizong, the same man who had denied him permission to leave, sent a personal escort to bring him into the city. The streets were lined with people. The emperor received him at the palace and asked for a full account of everything he'd seen. Xuanzang spent the next 19 years translating with a team of monks at Daci En-Si, Great Wild Goose Pagoda, which he built for that purpose. He translated 1,335 chapters of Buddhist scripture from Sanskrit to Chinese. These translations became the foundation of Chinese Buddhist thought. They corrected centuries of errors. They introduced concepts that Chinese philosophy had never encountered. The pagoda still stands. You can visit it in Xi'an today. It's one of the most recognized landmarks in China, and most tourists who photograph it have no idea that it was built by a man who walked to India alone and came back carrying the library. Xuanzang died in 664 at the age of 62. His funeral was attended by over 1 million people, the largest gathering for a single person in Tang Dynasty history. 9 centuries later, a novelist named Wu Cheng'en took Xuanzang's journey and turned it into fiction. He added a monkey with a magic staff, a pig who could talk, a river demon with a necklace of skulls. He called it 西游记, Journey to the West, and it became the most famous novel in Chinese literature. The monkey fights demons, the pig complains, the monk needs rescuing every other chapter. Now, the real Xuanzang crossed the Gobi alone, without water, without a companion, and came home carrying the library that changed a civilization. He didn't need a monkey. Xuanzang walked alone across a desert that killed everyone who tried. But there's another monk who walked alone down a road no one would travel after dark. What he found waiting for him, I still don't know what to make of it. It's on your screen right now. Click it to watch. And until next time, 再见!